The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello everyone, and welcome to the second in the Joliot Curie Programme webinar series 2018, How to Stand Out. Just to explain, I'm Julie Franklin. I'm a member of the careers team at the Royal Society of Chemistry, and I'd just like to tell you a little bit about how the Joliot Curie series got its name. It's named for Irene Joliot Curie, who was the daughter of Nobel Prize winner Marie Curie, and she was a winner in her own right, jointly with her husband Frederick, the Nobel Peace Prize for Chemistry in 1935 for their discovery of artificial radioactivity. And if you want to find out more about Irene Joliot Curie, it's a fascinating story. She is actually one of our 175 faces of chemistry, which you can find on our website. And also one of our guests today is another one of our 175 faces of chemistry, Dr Hanadi Hassan Nixon. Also on the panel, we have Dr Mike Andrews, who is a deputy editor for journals here at the RSC. So that's who you'll hear speaking today, and I'm sure they've got some fascinating insights for you on how to stand out, how to get yourself noticed, even if it doesn't necessarily come that easily to you. So enough from me for the moment. I'm going to ask our guests to introduce themselves and just give a brief description of their current role. So Mike, would you like to say hello and tell us a little bit about what you do?
Sure, thanks, Julie. Yes, so I'm Mike Andrews. As it says, I'm a deputy editor here at the Royal Society of Chemistry. So I do have a chemistry background. I did a PhD in inorganic chemistry, followed by 2 postdocs. I moved here to publishing at the beginning of last year, so I've been here for almost 2 years now. During that time, I've been working as the deputy editor of several journals, mostly Dalton Transactions and Christeng.com. So for that task, I work together with the editorial team and the editorial board, and I do a lot of data analysis, and I bring all that together to come up with a strategy for the journals, which involves, commissioning new work as well as promoting work that we've already published. I also deal with general sort of day-to-day maintenance, like ethical cases, and the editorial team asks my advice on submissions when they have a particularly difficult case, which they can't figure out whether to accept or reject or send out to reviewers. So that's my current role.
That's great. Thanks, Mike. And Hanadi, can we come to you? Could you tell us a little bit about yourself and your current role as a research fellow?
Yes, I am Hanadi Hassan Nixon. Thank you, Julie, for giving me this opportunity. I have done my PhD at Imperial College in biochemistry and plant pathology, and I done my first postdoc. And then after my first postdoc, I decided I would like to do something with molecular biology. So I did a voluntary project for 6-8 months to learn the techniques of molecular biology, and then I joined a group Tony Cass, Professor Tony Cass, to do diagnostics. He works on medical diagnostics, and I decided that's what I would like to do as a career. And so that was my first postdoc, after which I went for a career break, having and raising up a family of young children, of 3 of them. And then after that, I decided I like to go back to science. So I went and I did another voluntary work to see what sort of science I would like to do, if I still have the pair of hands to work on or not. So I decided if I do voluntary work at St. Mary's, doing molecular biology again, then it might make me decide. And that's what I have done. And then I found about the Daphne Jackson Fellowship, which I have applied to, and I became a research fellow at Imperial College with Professor Tony Cass again. And that is it.
Okay, thank you very much. That's a very interesting career history. I mean, as everybody knows, the Joliot Curie Programme is, we design it to encourage people who come from, we might say, a non-traditional background and are hoping to be successful in an academic career. And I think, Hanadi, your career history does demonstrate that. I mean, I know you mentioned briefly there that you took a career break and that you returned to research on a Daphne Jackson Fellowship. I wonder if you could tell us a bit more about that, because there must have been times when you wondered and when you had to stand out and maybe didn't feel that confident about doing it. So could we hear a little bit more about your break, your return from your break, and how you got your Daphne Jackson Fellowship, please?
Of course, it did. At the time when I decided for the career break, it was very difficult to do part-time research work. Things have changed a little bit now when you're allowed to do like 50%. So during the career break, I couldn't do any research work, but I kept active, with other things like tutoring, A-level chemistry, biology, and so forth. I did a part-time position with Imperial Innovation as a patent and license administrator. Mm-hmm. But when I decided to go back into scientific research, I did this voluntary work at St. Mary's to decide if I'd like to go, as I have mentioned earlier, if I would like to go back in exactly what I was doing. And I realized, yes, that I would like to carry back on the diagnostic, medical devices diagnostic research. So I went and I approached Professor Tony Cass. I said to him, I'm interested to work on the field of asthma, and I would like to develop a diagnostic device for asthma, and then we might modify it for respiratory diseases. And of course, as usual, Tony Cass was always there to support, and he said, yes, okay. And he said he was actually approached by Professor Trevor Hansel at St. Mary's, who was a consultant immunologist, and he was also looking for somebody to do the medical device for asthma. So it was just a great opportunity to talk to Tony. And then I went over and I talked to Professor Trevor Hansel. I told him about my interest, and I would like to do a research project on a medical diagnostic device for asthma. And of course, he was very thrilled with that, because it was like a dream come true for him. So between the three of us, we sort of formulated a good idea. And so when I started to write the research proposal, I definitely had a very focused idea on exactly what I want to do and how I was going to be able to help, the community for that device sort of works. And that was a good base to start writing the proposal. And when you have an idea and you know exactly how to build it up. And that helped a lot in getting the fellowship, because of course, as you have said, it is very competitive, but just knowing exactly what you would like to do, and then you can justify why it's needed and how useful it can be, and that the fact that there isn't many of these kind of things around that people can do with or need them in their daily life, especially for people who are suffering from such disease, then it was just very good way of being able to secure the fellowship. And also networking with other people really helped in, finding about this research, how good it will be and how beneficial it will be for the medics. So yes, I would say it just it's important that you really know exactly what you would like to do and focus in how you make use of that project, and how will it be good for the rest of the community around you or for the people around you. And that was...
Yeah, no, that's really interesting, Hanadi. I mean, there are several things that came out of your story there. If we're talking about how to stand out, I mean, the fact that you were so proactive, the fact that you did voluntary work, is one way to stand out. People will always remember you if you've done something good for them as a volunteer. That says something about you personally, I think. So your proactivity was clearly very important there, and that focus you had, that real passion and the real the real desire to do the project. You know, there's no shortcut, or there's no substitute for enthusiasm. And I think enthusiasm can really make you stand out from the crowd too. And talking about contacts and networks, yes, research proposals and CVs and all the rest of it are all very well, but they are only pieces of paper. The more people you know and who know you and understand your passion and your determination, you know, that helps to make you stand out too. So I think what comes out of your story, Hanadi, is you know, grasping this and running with it, you know, really being proactive about it.
Yes, and when you meet people, Julie, when you meet people, then even the idea becomes more like a reality, because because when you're talking with people of similar mindset or of similar interest, and then you start to find out how good this thing can be, or how much is it needed, or in what way it will help people. So you start to have a stronger feeling towards this project you're working on, and you start to be more attached to it, and that you would like it to be successful.
Yeah, no, I understand that. So, you know, in terms of what did help you to achieve success, I mean, it sounds like you've got some strong personal qualities there, like resilience and determination that helped you. But it's very interesting to hear you talking about how important it was to have other people's support there. You know, you mentioned the 2 colleagues you had. Did you have support from friends, or did you have a mentor? Were there other people who were encouraging you and spurring you on there?
I mean, of course, I always believe you can't clap with a single hand. You need 2 pairs of hands. You need a pair of hands to clap. And yes, I am very grateful to friends who have always been supporting you writing the fellowship. I mean, especially after having 12 years a career break.
Gosh, was it as long as that? It was 12 years?
Yes, indeed.
Wow.
Yes, indeed. It was 12 years of a career break. So to come back and write something completely scientific, but I have to say the Daphne Jackson Fellowship Scheme is an absolutely brilliant scheme. It helps and supports people like myself, or people who had a career break for different reasons. There is a mentor there, which it's been, you know, you write your proposal, and then they read it, and then they send you back comments and so as how to improve it or to make it more clear. And so the Daphne Jackson Fellowship Scheme is an absolute brilliant scheme for people who are returning back from the career break. And plus also, of course, friends, when they see you writing, going to the library and coming back from the library every day, you know, you just get the thumbs up from your friends and neighbors, and, you know, that makes you feel, okay, you're going to do a good job here. So yes, as I said, you can't clap with a single hand, and hence, yes, you need a lot of support, but just stick to it. Don't give up. I always look at things like, I always look at the stairs and I say, I cannot go to the top of the stairs in one go. Yeah. You need to climb one step at a time, and that's how it goes.
Right, so that's a very good piece of advice. And I think if you've got that genuine enthusiasm for the project, as I say, that will help you to stand out. The more people you know, the more people who are aware of what you've got to offer will help you to stand out too. The Daphne Jackson, I would agree, is a fantastic scheme, but it is very competitive, as we know. So I think anyone who's listening, you know, it's all about thinking about what will make you stand out from the competition, you know, what's special about you. So that's a really interesting story there, Hanadi, and I didn't realise that your career break was as long as 12 years, so that's even more of a success story. So yeah, that's great. Well done. Yeah. Okay.
Thank you.
You're welcome. I'm going to turn to Mike now, because obviously an excellent publication record is essential if you're going to succeed in academia. So I'm going to ask Mike to talk through really how the RSC selects work to publish and what would make an author stand out to him and his colleagues, and maybe talk about how that process works. Maybe if you understand a little bit more about it, it's easier to navigate it, Mike.
Sure, yeah. So yeah, on screen now, if you can see it, is a flow chart showing the stages the manuscript will go through between being submitted to a journal and finally being either published or rejected. And this applies, this is based on the RSC processes, but it applies to a lot of journals. A lot of publishers use something similar. And the real thing to take away from this is that, there are a number of hurdles that you have to cross and a number of different audiences that you need to write for. And you can use different parts of your manuscript to appeal to these different audiences. So, the first stage after you submit a manuscript is that it gets an initial level of assessment from an editor. And this will be based on scope, and they'll make some sort of broad assessment about the sort of impact and quality of the work. So the editor might be what we call a publishing editor. So this is someone who's employed by the publisher, and they work full-time assessing manuscripts, normally on a sort of small handful of journals. So they have normally a PhD background, but broad experience with a lot of work that's being published in the field. Alternatively, your work might go to what we call an associate editor. So this is a working academic out there in the field doing their own research, publishing their own work, but we contract them to handle manuscripts for us as well. And they're a little bit more, focused. They handle papers normally broadly within their own field. But the main thing to remember here is that the first person who sees your manuscript won't necessarily be particularly familiar with your field. They'll generally have some broad knowledge, but you'll really need to sell your work at quite a basic level. So, the phrase that editors love to use is hypothesis-driven research. So you need to explain, why you're doing your research. What question are you trying to answer? Why is that important? And you can use, obviously, the introduction to your paper and the abstract, but the cover letter is really important for this as well. That's where you can really spell it out in your own words. Like I say, tell them what hypothesis you're trying to answer, and say what sort of communities of researchers it will appeal to, and how this overlaps with readership of the journal. So hopefully if you do all that, your manuscript will get past the editorial stage, and then it will be sent out for peer review. So if you go on to the next slide, I've got a few bits of advice for dealing with the reviewers. So, essentially, although editors might not be in your field, reviewers will certainly be in a very similar field. So you should basically write your paper, write your results and your experimental details as if you're writing for yourself, or as if you're writing for someone in your own group. So, all the experimental details that you would expect to see, that you would want to carry out on your own materials, you should include. They can go, the raw data can go into the supplementary files, and put a little bit of effort into formatting and organizing that. Don't just make it into a data dump, make it easy to read. And if you found something difficult, just say so. The classic example of this is elemental analysis. Everybody knows how difficult it is to get elemental analysis on some particularly air-sensitive compounds, for instance. If you've had that trouble, just say so. It's probably not going to be, an instant black mark against your paper. Just provide as much evidence as you would need to prove that you've made what you've made. But the opposite of that, you don't want to make problems seem bigger than they really are. And this applies at a larger scale with the general background to your journal. You don't want to make something seem like it's a huge societal problem that's trying to be solved. It also applies on a procedural level. So don't make it out like you've had a really hard time synthesizing a particular compound or getting a piece of characterization if you haven't, because your reviewers will pick up on that. Going back to, assuming that they have your knowledge, don't shy away from inconvenient references. If there's a reference that disagrees with your conclusions or has done some similar work, don't think that you can miss that out, because you should always assume that your reviewers are going to know about those papers, because obviously you do. But I mean, your reviewers could actually be the authors of those papers as well. So bear that in mind, and take on those inconvenient references. Explain why your work is different, or why you think your work makes a stronger argument. And most reviewers can see past their personal bias, I think, and they, if they think you've made a strong case, they'll agree with you. So if you've done that, you should hopefully get some decent responses from the reviewers. So that's when you need to think about revising your manuscripts. So it's important to remember that this applies regardless of whether or not you've been accepted or rejected. So, I mean, just quickly referring back to that flow chart I showed you at the beginning, you can see that, after the decision by the editor and then the author revisions, it does actually go back to peer review. We do occasionally reject things if authors cannot make or will not make some of the changes that are requested for them. But taking these criticisms and these suggestions into account applies if you've been rejected as well. I mean, you shouldn't just take the exact same manuscript that you've submitted and just go to the next manuscript the next journal down the list and submit it again. Each step of the way, you should take those criticisms into account, because it'll improve your chance of getting accepted next time. So don't take them personally. Don't assume that you know who the reviewers were and that it was that one researcher that has a bit of a grudge against you, because in my job I get to see who makes these comments, and most of the time when people try to guess who's given them a harsh review, they're wrong. Quite often when they've gotten a harsh review, it's actually been one of the recommended reviewers that they've listed when they've submitted. So just leave the personal aspect out a bit. But if you are accepted, don't feel like you have to make every change that they suggest. They might ask for a piece of characterization that requires you go down to a synchrotron, and maybe you don't have that kind of access. In that case, just remember that they're a researcher just like you, and they've been in the same circumstances, and just say, we'd love to do that. We can't this time, but we'll look into that next time. But you should at least address all the comments or concerns that your reviewers have raised. So, that could be through going out and getting some more characterization, or it could just be clarifying your manuscript or explaining why you don't think that's necessary within the manuscript, or you could just address those comments in your letter back to the editors. You shouldn't just try and miss something out and assume that your editors will forget about it, because they can compare the original decision letter and your letter side by side and see if you have done something. Finally, something that's really important that some people kind of forget about is that these days there's multiple options for when your manuscript goes online. So you often get the chance to tick a box at the beginning which says you can publish an accepted manuscript as soon as the decisions come back. If you've done that, make sure you know when it goes online. Make sure that all the important changes to your manuscript have been done before, because if you don't, then you might have to print a correction or even a retraction, and that's a bit of a hassle for everyone. So overall, that's my advice for building up your publication record.
No, that's great advice. Thank you, Mike. I mean, I don't want to dwell on the negatives, but these are all aspiring academics that we've got listening in today. So sure. I'm just wondering, I mean, I think a fact of life must be rejection, mustn't
Absolutely,
it? So
yeah.
Let's just talk about the R word. What would your advice? You've already said don't take criticisms personally, but how would you advise somebody who's had a rejection and then maybe they can't help but take it personally? How can you pick yourself up after that and march on, as it were?
Well, I think one thing to remember is that most publishers have some sort of appeal process.
Okay.
So, you know, look into that. If you truly think that a decision is unfair, you know, everyone makes mistakes, and that goes for editors and reviewers as well. So, you know, look into the appeals process. Maybe, you know, there's a chance that you can get the rejection overturned. But, you know, if you remember that the reviewers are scientists as well, and they have experience in the field, and try to find some use in their comments, and, you know, incorporate those into your next round. Like I say, don't just work your way down a list of journals by impact factor and let your journal fall where it will, or let your article fall where it will. Try to improve it at each stage. And yeah, essentially just keep on going.
Right, yeah, no, that's great advice. I mean, all the successful academics that we speak to as part of the Joliot Curie Programme can all tell you stories about sort of rejections and how they thought that was the end of their career. So, you know, I mean, to be fair, I expect that's how most people would feel. But it is that, you know, you've both you and Hanadi have both referred to that kind of determination, that steely core you need just to pick yourself up and just to keep going. You know, there's merit in just having that determination, isn't there? Yeah. Well, that was really helpful, Mike. Thank you. Thanks very much. A bit more generally now, you know, from each of your perspectives, I'd just like to ask you a question about, again, bearing in mind the audience for these webinars are people who are at the very beginning of an academic career, possibly thinking about whether academia is the right thing for them. What piece of advice would you give to someone who is absolutely passionate about the research that they're doing, but they may be feeling a little bit less confident in promoting themselves? So in other words, this whole idea of how to stand out and making yourself stand out is really quite uncomfortable for them. What piece of advice would you give somebody like that? Can I ask Hanadi first?
Yes. You know, usually when you start your research and then you start to think how important it is, and you start to ask yourself questions. But as time goes on, my advice, or I would recommend or encourage, you know, as a scientific researcher, is to do seminars, group seminars. You know, sometimes you can start with just doing group seminars where you can present your work to a small group, even if within your lab. And that always gives you a good feedback of how good and important is your project to yourself and to other people, and especially when you get a feedback by them asking questions, so that you realize, oh, there is some importance in this project I'm doing, and then slowly that makes you feel a lot better about your work. And then maybe you can slowly move on to do departmental seminars. A lot of the departments tend to do departmental seminars, so that every group or every lab or every lab is giving a presentation about the work they're doing. So if you do that, also helps, and that makes you become also seen by other colleagues in your department. And then I would also suggest publications. Publications is also a very big key I always think of publications as grades to students. Having the higher grade, you might get what you like to do with your degree. The same for publications for a scientist. And the more publications you have, the more you recognize you become, the more confident you feel, especially if people are referring to your papers for references. So there are different ways of building it gradually, and with time, you start to realize, you know, there is a lot of recognition in this work, and there is a lot of interest in this work. And then conferences, either nationally or internationally, that also brings a lot of contact with other people and makes you more aware of how important is your research, and how important and what impact it has on other people. And that also builds up to your confidence. So I would say basically interacting with other people slowly and gradually helps to make you realize how important your work is, and it brings a lot of confidence and adds up a lot of confidence.
Okay, I think there's an important thing there, isn't there, about building up gradually, because some people think that, or they have a misconception that to stand out, they've got to be different from how they normally are. Whereas I think what makes people genuinely stand out is talking to the right people about the right things at the right time, and also being a great listener as well, because I think that impresses people. So if you're naturally the kind of person who doesn't like to push yourself forward, I know very well that the kind of skills that you need to stand out and promote yourself are very often not the skills that you need to be a good researcher. So some people do find this particularly difficult. But I hope we're managing to get around that today by talking about how you can build things up gradually, how you can start with what you know, and use your genuine interest and enthusiasm for your research to make you stand out. You know, it's not you talking about yourself, it's talking about your research to the right people that will make you stand out. So I think that's very good advice. You know, the conferences idea is a great idea, Hanadi. Of course, the RSC has a lot of conferences and a lot of activities like that going on. So do check out our website and find the ones that are appropriate for you. And I think, Hanadi, you just wanted to talk about some alternatives to an academic research career for people who might be hovering on the middle here. So do you just want to talk us through your slide here?
Yeah, yes. I mean, usually for a research career, you have either of two routes you can follow. If you would like to follow the academic route, where you do a scientific research at the college or at the university, and then usually after a postdoc, if your PI or principal investigator or your supervisor managed to get another grant, then he recruits you as a postdoctoral research fellow, and you carry on working maybe on what you have been doing as part of your PhD project. And while you're doing that, it's always good out of the postdoctoral research is you do a lot of publications, or maybe even one or two, just to show that you are scientifically competent, and you're able to do work on your own. You're always able to publish papers on that field, and that slowly also builds up to your confidence, as that you're becoming slightly independent of your supervisor, even though you're getting his mentoring and help and advice. Mm-hmm. But you're also becoming your oneself as a research on your own of your own identity. And if you manage to get a few publications, usually sometimes you can always able to secure a research grant. And when you secure your own research grant, you become a research fellow. And that's a good way to establish your own projects, your own ideas, and start to develop your own group. And then you would be able to have your own students, even PhD students, if you manage to get one of the big grants like the EEP SRC or the BBSRC grants. Yeah. And after that, then you have opened a big gateway for yourself as a research fellow to carry on, especially if you are expanding your group and you're starting to do some lectures in the department and, active in the department. Then once you become a senior research fellow, then you are likely to get, with loads of publications, then you're likely to get a lecturership position. Okay. And it is very enticing kind of career, this one. But for some people who might want to choose another route of going to industry, where they do their they apply their scientific skills, and they go through different stages of being a scientist, and then senior scientist, and principal scientist, and so it's a kind of a different type of career. Hello?
Yes, we're still here. Yep.
Yeah. So it's a different type of a career, but it's the difference is basically into when you're in academic world, you're able to carry on with your own projects and your own ideas, and you're able to your own kind of inventions, and so it's very lucrative, I would say, in one side. So people have different ways of looking at things when they are in their scientific careers. Some people like to go just pure research, or some people like to go into the academic side, where it's more your publications, and as well you have more research ideas, and you can do more than one type of research because you have different students, so you can have related fields, but at the same time there's different. So you can work on, for example, if you're working on diagnostic devices, you can work on glucose sensors, you can work on cholesterol sensors, you can work on cytokine sensors. So you're working on the same umbrella of diagnostic devices, but then you're working on different types of devices for different diseases, and hence it's also very lucrative to be in academic research.
Yeah. Okay. No, that's really interesting, because I mean, it is important to point out that although people listening today are probably aspiring to an academic research career, there are other research career tracks available. And if you're an RSC member, then the RSC careers team, of which I am one, are here to help you with all of those sorts of transitions. And I'll come back to telling you a little bit about how you can get in contact with us if that's an issue that you'd like to discuss a bit further on during this broadcast. But I'm going to come back to Mike now, and I'm going to ask Mike to explain about an opportunity that might arise from the RSC for you to stand out and get yourself noticed. So, Mike, tell us about being a reviewer.
Yes, so reviewing is a great way of, developing your skills as a reader, as a writer, as an academic. It puts you in touch with the field that you're in, and it can also make you stand out to publishers, because working together with publishers can be a good way of improving your career. Guest editing themed issues, taking roles on editorial boards, and having a good reviewing record can help with that. But the main thing that I found when I was a researcher, when I was a postdoc, was that I really just enjoyed seeing papers at their earlier stage. So it meant that you were among the first people in the community to know when there was a good new publication coming out, and you'd get to see that, and you would get to read it at an early stage and see that even some of the bigger names in the field, when their first paper comes in, there's a lot of changes that can be made to it. And reading papers like that really hones your sort of your critical thinking skills. And then you can use that when you're writing your own papers. You can start to kind of think ahead and think, what would I ask if I was sent this paper to review? Going through this process also helps you see, what happens to papers and how they look to people on the reviewing end of it. So you have a bit of understanding about that for when you come and submit your own papers. And, the journal will give you some advice about how to assess papers. So you can see what journal standards are. So our criteria for reviewing is that we need people who do already have PhDs. So if you're studying towards a PhD, you can contribute towards a review if your supervisor gets invited. But if you have a PhD, you can get in contact with publishers and you can ask to be added to their list, and they can contact you directly. You also generally need to have scientific literature. So that means either be an active researcher or someone who's has access to, a university network, for instance. And if you've published in, either the journal that you're reviewing for or some close competitors, so you have a good idea about both the sort of the subject area and the general scope and level of the research that's being published there.
Okay, so if people were interested in becoming a reviewer, Mike, what would they need to do?
Essentially, just have a look on the webpage of the journal that you're interested in.
Okay.
There should be some contact details, so you'll probably need to provide them with a CV and a publication record.
Okay, right. But all that information will be on rsc.org on our website.
Yes, yeah, on the RSC pages, it's there under the it will be the pre-submission link. It will come up with a box that you can use to get in contact with us, and we'll get back in touch.
Right.
It's similar sort of process across other publishers.
Okay, and I would definitely recommend that as being a good way to hone a lot of different transferable skills, I think, as well as maybe make new contacts and have something else that looks good and powerful on your CV. Now, talking of CVs, I just want to say a little plug from the RSC Careers team point of view. Of course, another way that you can make yourself stand out, I would agree 100% with everything our guests have said, but you do need to be thinking about what your CV looks like, what your covering letters look like, and all of that sort of thing. So the RSC Careers team, that's me and my colleagues, are here to support any member at any career stage anywhere in the world. Our careers pages with most of our information that you can get online is on the screen at the moment. So that's www.rsc.org/careers. And there's lots of information that you can just access for yourself there. But if you would like to get in touch with one of the consultants, me or one of my colleagues, we offer one-to-one consultations for people who are associate members, and individual guidance and as many consultations as you like for people who are members and fellows. So you'll find more about that on our pages, and we can help you personally with anything that we've discussed today. We also have a mentoring scheme, which is definitely worth mentioning at this point. Hanadi's already mentioned the importance of having people around you who are on your side, and I think our mentoring scheme is designed to do exactly that. All our mentors are members of the Royal or fellows of the Royal Society of Chemistry, but they will be independent and will just be wanting to see you achieve the best for yourself. So we've come to the point now where if any of you listening in have got some questions now for Hanadi or Mike or even for me, I would encourage you to type them in now, and we will try to answer as many of them as we can before the session finishes. We've already had one question coming in, so I'll read it out and we'll decide who's the best person to answer it. The question is, what are the main points you look for in a research proposal? So who'd like to tackle that one? Mike is smiling, so I'm going to ask Mike.
To be honest, I haven't got a lot of experience with looking at research proposals. I expect it's fairly similar to assessing a paper. You look for a strong set of results. It needs to be, at the moment, the way our research climate is, it needs to be hypothesis driven, with some clear application in mind, I think, but not necessarily too directly related. So I think the hypothesis driven is the strong thing, and really selling your own research and taking it to a broad audience who will have some chemistry experience, but not in your exact field. Okay,
that's fine. Hanadi, you've written successful research proposals. So what would be your main tips of what you should include and how you should put your points across?
Usually it comes always with novel ideas, or it's a continuing on project from your previous work, and you would like to carry on to say to improve the reproducibility of the particular device you're doing, or you just basically, it can be related to what you have already been doing, or you can do something completely novice. But also you have to put into consideration is the applicability of this project, and that you will be able to get something really out of it or not, because sometimes it could be too hypothetical as well. And it can be really, when you start to write about what you are going to do, and then you realize, oh my God, that's not really going to work out like this, because the time scale for this research project, say you have 3 years for it, but the amount of work you have put into that sort of research project, it might actually take 5 years, because you sometimes you get distracted from the fact that things don't go as straightforward as we expect it to. And that, of course, takes more time in making things happen. So I think there is two approaches. There are two approaches here. Is one the hypothesis behind and the application of that hypothesis and the time scale. So you have to be realistic in what you're writing down.
Okay, right, that's good advice. Yeah, okay. Thank you, Hanadi. We've had another question coming in now, and this questioner asks, how can you make yourself stand out if you have very few publications, e.g. because you were part of a large project or they simply didn't work out? So, Mike, have you got any pearls of wisdom on that one?
Yeah, so that's always, you know, when you're getting projects off the ground, it's always really tough because you know, these things often take a lot of initial investment in terms of time and resources, and sometimes things just don't turn out as great as you might hope. I think one thing you should really look for is, you know, go back over and look at your results and see if there's, you know, anything of novelty, and do a little bit of a search in the broader literature around every particular area that you've worked on in the project, and see if there's just anything that you can publish. You know, I think it's a lot about impact, most the highest impact, but you know, having a broad publication portfolio is good. So if you can find some small sort of nuggets of wisdom in your project and get them published, even if it's in a, you know, less well-read journal, then that's certainly a value. But another way that you can kind of ensure that something in your projects might work is building up collaborations. So, you know, it looks good to have a lot of papers on your CV, even if you maybe didn't play the biggest role on any of those. So, you know, when you're at conferences or even just around your own department, ask around and see if anybody, you know, needs help or could use help with any of the techniques that you're using in your own projects, and try and give them a hand with wherever you can. And finally, remember that, you know, papers aren't the only way that people can be assessed. You know, you're going to need to give a lot of presentations, both at conferences and during interviews. So really work on that and try and hone your presentation skills. Even if you didn't get the best results, you know, you can turn that itself into a good story that a lot of people, you know, in the audience or on the panel will probably be able to, you know, identify with.
Okay, thank you. Hanadi, from your point of view, what advice would you give to someone who's in that situation?
I would say I am one of those kind of people myself. Because,
good person to ask then, yeah.
Yes, no, because when I did my first postdoc and I did my publications, but I think because of proprietary rights and with the company, we didn't manage to carry on with a lot of publications. And that can be also a draw, can be a disadvantage for some people. But of course, as Mike has just said, you can also do your presentations in other ways so that you start to stand out in your field and you are knowledgeable. And I know that through publications, you become known, but also doing oral presentations and seminars and being involved in conferences, that also helps in your being recognized as a scientist in your field. Okay. In addition, also as iterating what Mike has said, sometimes, and with our PhD students, sometimes they were doing projects and they were getting negative results, but they still had to write a thesis. But I always used to advise, negative results doesn't mean you're not successful. You are writing down that this experiments didn't work and it did not produce so on so that means you're saving another person 3 years of his PhD so that he does not do the same mistakes. So we don't have to look at negative results as being negative. We have to look at it actually as positive, and you're helping somebody else not to go in the same track.
That's a great way. That's a great way to look at it, actually. Yeah.
It is true, because I mean, you come up with an idea. This is the way scientific research goes. You write up an idea, and you want it to work, and sometimes it starts to work, but then halfway through, you're not able to go further than that. You are hitting a wall, and you're not going any further. And some of the students, they keep repeating and repeating, and they find within, oh, time has passed, and they did not get a lot of good results as they were expecting, being PhD students. But you are writing it down, but you're making other million students realize that this system doesn't work, and you should not go that way. Try to invest your time in something more useful.
Okay, thank you very much for that. Good piece of advice. Okay, we've got another controversial subject, a question about a controversial subject that's come up here. Someone is asking about how plagiarism, or whether plagiarism affects research proposals. So, Mike, do you want to say anything about plagiarism generally, or
yes,
specifically?
So,
yeah.
You know, like I mentioned at the very beginning, I do sometimes have to deal with ethical cases which will involve plagiarism. So I certainly think, you know, it could impact how your research proposal is received. So I would do all you can to ensure that, you know, not just that the work is novel, but where you're reusing some of your earlier work, that you've actually got the rights to do that, and that you know, you've correctly cited even your own work. One thing I would recommend is looking to see if, you know, you or your institution have any access to text analysis software. There's some out there which will take an uploaded document and compare it to everything that's already been published. And I know they're used routinely by some publishers, and often in universities to check student reports. You know, I would just try running any proposal or any paper through those kind of things before, just to see what the results look like. You know, you might have accidentally reused something that you've read, or you might have been making notes and didn't realize that you were, you know, when you refer back to your notes, you didn't realize that you were quoting directly. So I would definitely constantly have that at the back of your mind when you're writing anything for your academic career.
Thank you. Hanadi, any experience of that from your point of view?
I mean, yes, I did hear about some of this before, and sometimes it can be actually accidental. People are not aware that it's actually happening. If you're reading somebody else or reviewing somebody else's paper, but as you know, as you go along, then you realize this has happened, and then of course sometimes the editor, they come back to you and they ask you about this kind of plagiarism which you were not even aware about. And especially if you're reviewing somebody else's paper, then you just have to mention, you know, that, as Mike has said, you know, that try to come up with your own, and just even changing, coming from your own point of view is far much better than using somebody else's idea, because after a while you will start to feel you're not actually doing your work, you know, in a way. You are doing somebody else's work, or you are taking somebody else's work, but you lose building up your own ideas, because the more you work on your papers, and the more you're writing papers, the more you build up and expand your knowledge, and the more you expand your horizon and build up ideas of exactly what you want to do next in the next paper or in the next project work. And hence we try to avoid kind of taking other people's ideas of work, and we just try to invest in our own achievements.
Okay, thank you very much for that. We have a last question, and I think it's largely been answered by the answers to the previous questions that we've had, but someone is saying, Dr. Hanadi mentioned that publications are important, but as early career researchers, we are trying to do as many things as possible to get recognised. Should we then just focus on publishing and leave out other activities such as outreach, networking, and institutional responsibilities, teaching, etc. I think, Hanadi, you've probably already answered that quite comprehensively, and your answer was no, wasn't it?
Yes, I have been through it, yes, and it is hard to juggle everything. It is not easy, but publication is important in one side, because if you like to do your own research grants, or to be independent researcher, then it helps you having those publications plus the other things you're doing. And of course, networking also helps tremendously, because it helps building up, acquaintances with people you might need. So in a way, I am not saying it is easy.
No.
It's a lot of hard work, but it can be done, I promise. I have managed, yes.
And if you're an RSC member, of course, we do try to make it easy for you to do those things. I've just put a slide up now about, again, how to get in touch with the careers team if you would like to talk to us about anything. And also because networks have been mentioned throughout this broadcast. If you are a member of the RSC, then do have a look at our networking opportunities, because they are extremely good. We do have conferences and events, of course, we've mentioned those, but we also have professional networks as well. And there's the link to them on the slide at the moment. Regardless of what category of membership you're in, you are entitled to join divisions, you're entitled to join special interest groups, and all of these things will help you to raise your profile. So if you're paying your subs to the RSC, then I would recommend you get your money's worth out of us and make sure that you join as many groups as you are entitled to and as are relevant for you. We have got some online professional development. It's always worth, that can make you stand out as well by showing that you're the kind of person who takes responsibility for their own career development. And we do have tools online to help you to do that. And if you're listening and thinking, well, I could do with, a course on some skill or another where I know I'm not that strong, we do also have a database of approved training courses. So I would encourage you to look at that too. We're running out of time now. Just to look at some other sources of support outside and information outside of the RSC, VTI is a great organisation for researchers, a lot of professional and career development advice on their website and tools and resources for you. So if you're not aware of that, then I would encourage you to have a look and make the most of those opportunities too. The other links on here, I'm sure you know more about them than I do. Lots of different ways to find academic positions, but your network is just as important as adverts, if not more. Some of these links on the slide now do have careers advice and do have careers articles, so it's worth looking at those into your monthly or weekly routine, just to keep you. Your research, of course, is important, but you need to keep in touch with the outside world and what other people are doing too. So make it a part of your professional development to always look around and look at the wider horizons. I would say that is important. Okay, well, we're now at the end of this broadcast, so I would like to thank you all very much for listening and for sending in the very perceptive questions that we've had. I hope everybody listening has found it useful and there's been something there that you can take away, so thank you for joining us. And of course, I'd like to say a huge thank you to our two panel guests today who've been very illuminating and made some very, very important comments there for you to take on board, I think. So a huge thank you to Dr Hanadi Hassan Nixon of Imperial College, and also thank you very much to Dr Mike Andrews of the RSC Publishing Division. So thanks both very much for joining us. Would you like to say thank you or any final words?
Julie, get in touch if you have any other questions about publishing, and we'll try to answer your questions.
That's great, thank you. Would you like to say goodbye, Hanadi?
Goodbye, and don't feel overwhelmed. You will get there. Just do it. You can.
Okay, I think that's a very, very positive note to end on. So thank you both very much. Thank you all for listening, and I wish you all the very best in your careers in the future. Thank you, and bye for now.
Thank you. Thank you, Julie.